All right, so this PowerPoint is going to be about water, specifically about the unique properties of water. We're going to keep this pretty simple. Water has some other properties that we are not going to cover because we just don't use them in this course. So this is going to hit what we will use for various purposes, right? So the first property of water is that water is polar. And this means that water has an unequal sharing of electrons between the hydrogen and the oxygen atoms within a given water molecule. Okay, and so that being said, the oxygen, so water, as we should all know, okay, is H2O. All right, so on this picture, the two white circles are the hydrogens and the red circle is the oxygen. All right, so the oxygen is going to be slightly negative. It's going to attract the electrons more strongly than the hydrogens do. Okay, so if this is a single water molecule, then this little set of two dotted lines is basically the same set of three dotted lines right here. That's a hydrogen bond, and so this water molecule is going to attach to this water molecule. The oxygen is going to bind to the hydrogen, okay, because opposite charges are going to attract, just like in a magnet. Okay, so one end has a slightly positive charge, the hydrogens, and the opposite end has a slightly negative charge, the oxygen. Right, and now, because water is polar, so basically this property of water, that water is polar, it's going to lead to all of the other properties, okay? So because water is polar with unequal sharing of electrons, it's also going to serve as the universal solvent. And you should have learned these two things as far as water being polar and it being the universal solvent, hopefully in middle school. And if not, hopefully you at least learned these terms, even if you didn't focus a ton on water with this. So water's the universal solvent, okay, and so the solvent is the substance that does the dissolving of the solute, okay, and so then combined the solute and the solvent make up a solution, right? So water's polar, right, and so other polar substances or other ionic compounds will dissolve in water. So this is salt, okay, sodium and chloride ions, right? And so that's just crystallized salt. And then when you add that to water, it's going to dissociate and break apart. And so those negative and positive sodiums and chlorines are going to be mixed throughout the water molecules. Okay, so water is going to dissolve lots of other polar substances to make solutions. If the substance is not polar, then it's not going to dissolve in water. All right, like lipids, for example, or fats, they do not dissolve in water. So if you think of a salad dressing, like a vinaigrette salad dressing, that the oil sits on top of the vinegar until you shake it up. You want to shake it before you pour it on your salad so you get a mixture of the vinegar and the oil. Then you sit that back on the counter, they separate again, and you've got two nice distinct layers. Okay, so you would want to shake it again before you pour it onto another salad. So this heading, water clings to itself and other molecules, has several properties within it. Okay, so you can't, if I were to ask you for what property of water, this is not your answer. Okay, the specific examples underneath that are. So the first one is cohesion. All right, so we're going to do some prefixes here as well. So co means together, okay? So if you think of cohabitate, it means you live probably with your other family members. Co-ed means like you go to a co-ed school. You've got boys and girls in the same classroom, right? So cohesion, this is the attraction of water molecules to other water molecules because of polarity. Okay, so if you go back to the diagram on the first slide, and that one water molecule stuck to another one, water's sticky, okay, and it sticks to itself, okay, water sticks to itself. We'll get to surface tension eventually, okay. So adhesion, anything that's adhesive, okay, is going to be where the substance is sticking to a different substance, right, and so examples of things that are adhesive, tape, okay, you can tape a poster to the wall. You can tape 2 pieces of paper together. You can tape something to a countertop, whatever it happens to be. A Band-Aid is adhesive, right? Velcro is adhesive, and think of how the 2 sides to Velcro are structured differently, okay, so that they stick together. So adhesion is where water is going to stick to another polar substance, a different polar substance, right? And so this is why essentially when we think of polar substances, they get wet and feel wet, where non-polar substances do not. Okay, so let's talk about a couple of these examples. So first off, that's a sandcastle, and the only way that somebody can build a sandcastle that's that awesome is that when sand is wet, it makes it sticky. Okay, so the grains of sand are going to adhere to each other if there's water to make them stick together. If there's no water, then the sand's dry and it just kind of runs through your fingers if you pick it up. Okay. This picture of the ducks, the reason that's here is that ducks have an oil on the surface of their feathers, so that when they live their lives in water or around water essentially, and so they're always kind of getting wet, getting in and out of water, and so they can shake off water really easily, and it just kind of flings off of their feathers when they get out of the water, and they don't stay wet. Okay. If your dog goes and runs into a pond, then your dog's hair is going to feel wet because it doesn't have those oils to repel the water the same way that a duck's feathers do. And then this picture, I'm sure we've all had this happen to us. This is showing essentially that somebody's pouring a glass of water, and that the water's running down the edge of the glass. It'd make a big puddle on the counter. And so what happens here is that as you start to pour, especially if you pour slow and if the glass is really full, then the very edge of that water kind of catches the outer surface of the glass, and because the glass is polar, it sticks to it, so it runs down it and makes a mess. Okay, this is where, like, if you have something really full, you want to kind of pour it really quickly and hope you're not going to make a mess just pouring too fast, because this is pretty common to happen if you pour too slowly and it's full. All right, so that's cohesion, water sticks to itself. Adhesion, water sticks to other polar substances. These 2 things work together to produce the next property of water, which is known as capillary action. Okay. So capillary action works with cohesion and adhesion working together for water to move up small tubes of that are made of polar substances. Okay, so first, let's talk about just in general. Adhesion is going to let water creep up the insides of whatever the tube is. So over here, let's picture that this line is a beaker or a graduated cylinder, because you can see the word meniscus there. So the water molecules at the top of the surface of the water are going to adhere to the glass. Okay, so if we imagine this water stuck to the glass right there, right, and so as that happens, then remember that there's bonds between these water molecules. And so as this one reaches for the glass kind of up above here, then it's going to pull the next one along. That's going to pull the next one along. Okay. And so that creates at the edge of the graduated cylinder or the beaker around the outer edge, it's going to create what we know as the meniscus, okay, where you have that curve, okay, to the surface of the water, and you would put your eyeball right there in order to read the volume within your graduated cylinder. Okay, so that's one example. This example, basically this is supposed to be this is celery, but this is a carnation, that if you put celery or carnation in food colored water, this is blue, you could do it with red, any color, as long as you've got fresh tissue at the bottom of that stem, that water is going to move up what's called the xylem, that's this word right here, move up the xylem tissue by capillary action. Right, and so the skinnier the tube, the further it's going to move, the water is going to move up the tube. Okay, so notice that the height of the water is higher here on the left than it is in these other two, because water is going to move further via capillary action. So this is how water gets up to the height or the top of a really, really tall tree, like a giant redwood in California, or even a tree in your yard. right, or a bush in your yard. So water's only going to enter water's only going to enter plants through the roots, and then it's going to move up the xylem tissue by capillary action to get into the leaves to be part of photosynthesis. Okay, and then it evaporates out of the leaves as well. We'll get into that more eventually. Okay, but this is how water moves up the xylem tissue in a plant. So it says 2 provides adhesion to the water column, or water makes a column by cohesion to itself. So again, an interaction between the two. All right, and so then the last of the 4 properties under water clings to itself and other molecules is what's known as surface tension. So surface tension is basically a measure of how difficult it is to stretch or break the surface of a liquid. So water is stretchy is kind of what it boils down to. So if we go back to water is polar, okay, and that you've got one water molecule attached to another water molecule, okay, that this oxygen would be attached to this hydrogen right here, that hydrogen bond between the 2 water molecules, that it can stretch. And it can stretch a lot, but eventually it'll break, okay? So cohesion is going to allow those water molecules to stay attached and stretch to a breaking point, or, up until kind of a breaking point. So this is a good example with this water strider walking on the surface of water. It's a lightweight insect, and so you can see where it's putting some pressure on the surface of the water, but it's not enough pressure to stretch those bonds and to break those bonds. Okay, but if you were to take your hand and put it on the surface of water, you could kind of put maybe a tiny bit of pressure and just feel the water underneath it, and you would probably be able to rest your hand there. But if you put a little bit more pressure, you're going to break that surface and your hand's going to go underneath. Another good example of this is how this leaf is covered in what's called the cuticle. It's a waxy lipid layer, okay, on the surface of leaves, and water molecules will bead up on that cuticle layer because of the fact that they're going to be repelled by those lipids that make up that cuticle layer, and then the little bead forms because the molecules stretch. Okay, and so then if this was right in front of me and I took my pen and I poked it into that little drop of water, then that would break the surface tension and it would roll off the leaf. Okay, then the final slide in this little section for me to talk about for this lecture is that essentially when it boils down to it, well, as it says there, water is crucial or essential for life. So hopefully you already all knew that water makes up most of the bodies of organisms. Okay, so this kind of ties in some of the properties of water. So we said water being polar leads to the other properties that were discussed. So chemical reactions can't happen in our bodies if there's not enough water present. So again, water's the universal solvent. Other polar molecules are going to dissolve in water. And so as a result of that, then a chemical reaction will hopefully take place if necessary. Another thing that water does in our bodies is it moves necessary materials not only around cells, but throughout our body, okay, as part of, our blood, for example, has water within it, and what have you. And then water can also move substances around ecosystems out in nature. Just think of a river or stream. That's kind of a simple way to keep that for right now. Basically, liquid water is always moving. And then the last thing here, and we haven't talked about enzymes yet, but water's going to play a role in making enzymes function. So what we're going to learn when we get to enzymes is that enzymes basically make life as we know it exist, okay? That they are proteins, they speed up chemical reactions, and they make those reactions occur at a much faster rate than they would if we did not have enzymes. And enzymes only function, again, with proper amounts of water to help them work. Please let me know if you have any questions.